Hello everyone, my name is Olivia, and today I'm going to be recommending a couple of books based off of people's favorite book tropes. So I went over onto my Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and I asked people to send in their favorite book tropes, and based off of those tropes, I would recommend them a book that I have read and really enjoyed that deals with that trope. If you want to take part in future videos like these, be sure to follow me over on Instagram because that's where I get all the questions and all the input from all my followers, so I'll be sure to link my Instagram down below. So let's get started. So a trope that I got a lot of entries for was the found family trope, along with the strong friendship trope. I have to recommend you One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. One Last Stop features a very strong friendship group that is just so sweet, so supportive. They are just such a lovely group of friends who all support one another and are all ready to lend a hand, and they are a group of 20-something-year-olds living in New York City. They are trying to make a name for themselves. They are falling in love. They are starting new careers, and it just feels so warm and fuzzy to read about them. They are definitely a group of friends that I just look up to and I just think of with such fondness, and I just cannot recommend that book enough because it is just so sweet. It is just so perfect for people in your 20s, and it just reminds you of the beauty of friendship because not only is this a romance book, but it also deals with finding a new friend group, finding a place in life, and finding that group of people who make you feel like you're at home, like they are your family, even though they aren't necessarily related to each other. Another trope that a lot of people sent in, which is no surprise to me, is the enemies to lovers trope. This is also personally one of my favorite tropes in the world, and I have not read a lot of enemies to lovers books that I was very satisfied with. But there is one book that I greatly enjoy that I don't see a lot of people reading, and it is Hate to Want You by Alicia Rye. This follows Livy and Nicholas, who meet together once a year to hook up with one another because they are not supposed to be together, but they cannot deny their attraction for one another. So they are sworn enemies on the streets, but they are lovers in the sheets. I just love this trilogy so much. I feel like a lot of people don't give this trilogy the attention it deserves. It is so sensual, it is so beautiful. All these characters blend in with one another throughout the series, and this deals with these two family empires who are enemies with one another, but these two characters are the son and daughter of those empires, and they come together once a year, and they can't deny the attraction that they have for one another, and slowly that turns into love, and it really complicates their relationships between their families, between their businesses, and it is just so good. It is so steamy. It is just, you'll just eat it up. It is such a good read, and it's so underrated. Someone sent in a hot, rich, sad girl who is kind of a bad person, but we love her anyways as a main character. This is one of my favorite tropes as well. It's very niche, it's very specific, and I have not read enough of it, but I do want to give you a classic book recommendation because I feel like these two characters just fit into this trope so perfectly that I can't not recommend them. And it is Daisy Jones and Evelyn Hugo. Both of these characters are incredibly rich, incredibly successful. They are sad, they are complicated, they are somewhat unlikable, but we just love them anyways because they are so flawed, because they are so raw, because they are so real. They just are these characters that are so relatable because they show the darker sides of their life. They show the messiness of their personality, and they are inherently flawed characters, but we can't help but love them because we see ourselves in these two characters. These are two books that I'm sure every single person has read, but I cannot stop recommending them because I genuinely really do love these stories. I love The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because Evelyn Hugo is just a very determined character, and sometimes her passion really gets in the way of her relationships, and she will do anything she can to be successful, and sometimes that is her downfall. Meanwhile, we have Daisy Jones, who is this character who is very rocky in life. She doesn't have a strong foundation in terms of her personality, in terms of her career, and she is just a very reckless type of character, and that recklessness can sometimes ruin relationships and just test people's limits. And these two characters are very authentic and real, and they just feel like real people. I think that they both have a lot of things to work through. They're very messy and rich and successful, but we can't help but love them anyway. Another trope that someone sent in is a story following characters in different plot lines and seeing them come together. And one book I have to recommend that follows that trope is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. It is winter 1945 during World War II, and we follow 4 different teenagers as they are traveling towards the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is a boat that is going to transport them away from the Soviet Union and towards safety. So we follow these 4 different characters from 4 very different walks of life. They have different privileges, they have different issues that they are dealing with, but they come together and they meet one another, share their history with one another, and go through this very traumatic moment in history that not a lot of people know about. This is one of my favorite books of all time because Ruta Sepetys really knows how to craft a character in such a short amount of time, because this is a book that you can probably read within one sitting, simply because the book is so fast-paced and will just suck you right in and you won't want to put it down. But I also really enjoy the fact that Ruta Sepetys just crafts these characters in such a real way that they feel like actual friends of yours, and you get to learn more about their past as they journey towards the Wilhelm Gustloff, and you get to really form a connection with them. Cannot recommend it enough. It's not for the faint of heart. It's a very sad read, but also a very necessary and educational read. Another trope that is very popular that was frequently asked was the Grumpy and Sunshine trope. And 2 characters that I love so much that are Grumpy and Sunshine incarnate is Hades and Persephone from Lore Olympus. Hades and Persephone are just the cutest characters ever. I just love them so much. Hades is a very gruff character. He's not the friendliest type of person to everyone in the world. But then we have Persephone, who is just sunshine and rainbows, and she's just such a kind character, and that really melts Hades' facade and really makes him put down his walls and fall in love with her. And I think that their dynamic is so cute because it is opposites attract. So you get to see Hades' really cold personality contrasted with Persephone, who is just so kind to everyone. She's so open to everyone around her, and I just love their dynamic because they just work so well together. And if you have not read this webtoon, it is so good. You could read it on the webtoon app, or you can buy the copies physically because they're finally being published, but I would just recommend you marathoning the entire story on webtoon because it is so far ahead from the books that are being published, and it's such a great story. It is so addictive. The next trope that someone sent in was the second chance romance trope, and the book that I have to recommend is The Right Swipe by Alicia Rai. Can you tell that I love her as an author? Can you tell that I will read anything that she publishes? The Right Swipe follows 2 different dating app creators. We follow Ree and Samson, and they each run their own dating app service, and they stumble upon one another one day at a conference, and they realize that they are old flames and that Samson previously ghosted Ree. So there's a lot of tension there because they have a lot of old feelings for one another, but they have to kind of put that aside to work through their business as rivals. And this is just such a fun romance. I'm not the biggest fan of the second chance romance trope because it's just not something that calls to me, but I just had a lot of fun with this one. I thought that these characters really worked through their issues both by themselves and together, and I think that the way that they reconnected was just so lovely. And I just also loved seeing the tension between these 2 very successful business people and how that tension is both in the boardroom but outside the boardroom. And if you were just looking for a second chance romance to dive into, I would highly recommend that one because it's really fun. Another trope that someone sent in was the slow burn romance trope, and the book that I have to recommend is Flashed by Zoe Castile. So Flashed follows our main character Patrick, who is a former soccer player, stripper, and now an actor, but then an accident leaves his life forever changed, and he kind of becomes a recluse in his own house. And then we follow Lena, who is hired to take care of Patrick's house and his property and just himself in general because he's going through a really big rough patch. And this romance is just such a good slow burn romance. So it's forced proximity because they have to live together in this house. We are following Lena, who doesn't know a lot about Patrick, and she's wondering why he is just so closed off to the world. So these 2 characters are somewhat polar opposites, and it kind of reminds me of Beauty and the Beast in the way that Beast is closed off to everyone in the world, and then we have Belle, who comes into his life and kind of changes him and pulls him out of that shell and makes him a better person. And I think that dynamic is very similar in this book, and I think if you love Beauty and the Beast, you would then love Flashed because it feels like that dynamic. I just loved the slow burn romance, and I just thought that it was very well done. It was just so sweet. And if you have any slow burn book recommendations, I need them because that's one of my favorite book tropes in the whole entire world. I need a book that would just make me yearn, make me want The people who get it, get it. The next trope that someone sent in was a family saga. So a family saga follows a bunch of different family members. So we usually start with the parents, then the kids, then the grandkids, and it is a generational tale. And I have a book that I just finished recently, and it is Pachinko. Pachinko is a 4-generation family saga following a Korean family as they are exiled out of Korea and have to move to Japan, and their lives are greatly affected by the political landscape of Japan at the time and how they treated Koreans who live in Japan and how they treated Koreans in general. I really love following a family for a long course of time. You get to really know them, you get to see the similarities and the differences between the parents and the children, and how the parents and the children's relationships are so different, and I just thought it was beautifully done. The next trope that someone sent in was forced proximity but not romance, and I have to recommend Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Before the Coffee Gets Cold takes place in one cafe that is a time traveling cafe, so anyone is able to travel to the past or to the future in this cafe as long as they get back to the present before their coffee gets cold. So we follow 4 different stories in this book, and we follow 4 different patrons who use this magical cafe to travel to the past or to the future to get some closure or talk to people from their past that they can't talk to currently. So this all takes place in the cafe. You don't ever actually go outside the cafe, so it's a very contained story. It is forced proximity because all these characters are forced to stay in one spot and interact with one another. It is one of the most feel-good stories that I have read that is both emotional but also uplifting and reminds you of the importance of life and relationships and the importance of appreciating the time that you have with others and not letting those moments go and just kind of living your life to the fullest. And if you need a good pick-me-up story that's also very emotional, I would highly recommend this. The next trope that I have to recommend is for forbidden love, and I have to recommend you The Goddess of Nothing at All. The Goddess of Nothing at All is a Loki retelling following Loki and Sigyn. Loki and Sigyn have probably one of the biggest forbidden romances out there because their romance is the catalyst for a lot of change in Asgard. So Loki and Sigyn are not supposed to be together, but they are greatly attracted to one another and they want to be together, but everyone else around them is trying to keep them apart. And it is such a good story. It's one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I think it's my only 5-star read that I've picked up this year. So this is like a forbidden romance where everyone else wants to keep them apart for the greater good, but these 2 characters just want to be together and they just ignore everyone around them, and that leads to some dangerous consequences. And that is all the recommendations that I have to give to you today, but I do have 2 tropes that 2 people asked for that I want your recommendations for, because I don't have a recommendation for them, but these 2 tropes that they provided me are 2 tropes that I would love to read about, and I know that they will love to read about, so I would love to get your recommendations down below. So the first trope that they sent in was Deal with the Devil. I would love to read a story about a deal with the devil that isn't The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue because I did not enjoy that book. So if you have a recommendation for that type of trope, please put them down below because I would love to pick that up. And another trope that someone submitted to me was academic rivals to lovers. I don't think I've ever read a book where people are enemies to lovers in a university setting. I wouldn't really want to read it in a high school setting because I don't really read YA as much anymore, but I would love to read it in like a dark academia setting. I think that would be so good. I think it would be so juicy to see their rivalry, and I think that that would be so much fun to read. So if you have recommendations for both of those tropes or any trope that I have talked about today, because I'm sure a lot of people will love even more recommendations from all of us, please put them in the comments down below. And if you want to connect with me anywhere else on social media, all my links will be down below, and I just recently created a Discord and I'm really excited about it. I want it to be like a really safe, comfortable space for us to talk about movies, Marvel, books, plants, sewing. I'm really excited about setting it up, and I want a lot of people to join so we can all talk to each other and just gush about all things fiction. So if you have made it this far in the video, leave a plant emoji down below to commemorate me filming in my front porch. And if you have made it this far in this video, thank you so much for watching all the way through. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!